I was like, why did you hire me for this job? He's like, I knew your work. I'm like, I don't have a technical degree. And he goes, what I like and why you're successful and why I wanted you for this position is because you think outside the box. And inside, it took me a while to realize, I was literally said to myself, Robert, that's because I actually don't know enough to know what the box is. And so but I came to realize that that's actually an asset, because if you're like, oh, this is how it's always done, this is how I was taught, then you only end up coloring between the lines because it's so ingrained in you. But when you don't know, it can be really liberating because you actually don't even know what the confines are supposed to be.
Welcome to the Bountiful Podcast. I'm Shan, and this is a space for curious, thoughtful conversations about what it really means to live a bountiful life. In a world that often rewards more, faster, and louder, Bountiful exists to slow things down, to explore joy, resilience, creativity, and the small choices that shape how we live every day. Each episode is a conversation with someone who's thought deeply about life, work, health, money, relationships, or purpose, and what they've learned along the way. If you're looking for ideas you can actually live with, you're in the right place. In this episode, I'm joined by Mallun Yen, a founder, venture capitalist, and community builder whose career spans law, startups, and building one of the most distinctive venture funds in the world. We talk about growing up as an outsider, learning to turn observation into an advantage, and why not being the obvious choice can lead to better decisions in business and in life. Mallun shares her experience founding Operator Collective, what she's learned about feedback, leadership, building relationships, and why pressure can be a privilege. We also have an honest conversation about identity, menopause, mental health, grief, and the importance of talking about things that are usually kept quiet, especially in high-performing environments. Mallun's journey reflects courage, connection, and a willingness to reimagine the status quo. Mallun, welcome to the Bountiful Podcast.
Thank you so much, Sean.
So nice to be here in California with you.
It's good to see you after all these years.
I think the last time was a wedding.
It was a wedding. Someone from your part of the world.
Yeah, the Kiwis and Australians.
Yes, my favorites.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background and upbringing?
I was born in Flushing, New York. Have you ever heard of it?
No, never.
It's in Queens, which is a big immigrant entry point. And so my parents were immigrants, and they came over from actually China via Taiwan, and lived there until I was about 3, and then moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the heart of the Silicon Valley, but did not look like this when I lived here and when I was young.
What did it look like?
A lot of cherry orchards. Some of the highways weren't here yet. Downtown San Jose was a ghost town, and I used to ride my little huffy dirt bike around all of the dirt hills and in the percolation ponds. Now that I think about it, they were all kind of green, so I don't think it was particularly good for me, but it was fun.
Did you ever believe that you were going to end up working in tech?
Did I ever think I was going to work in tech? No. I mean, I was from a young age, I was exposed to it because my dad, when we moved here, was an engineer to start with. But my view of tech was actually pretty negative because this was in the 70s and the 80s when there was a lot of massive layoffs. The economy was terrible. And so he would often come home from work saying, I got laid off today. And then he would get hired back again. I remember him saying, a headhunter called, and I was like, what in the world is a headhunter? And then so it was kind of topsy-turvy like that. And eventually he stopped being an engineer and had a series of mom and pop businesses. And so for much of my years that I remember, we actually had a series of mom and pop businesses, which were also very up and down because it's the American dream, right? To have your own business, but it's very hard.
What did you learn from that time with them running all of their own businesses?
Well, so the businesses ranged from things like a liquor store to a Chinese restaurant. I could keep going. And actually, in the early days, I almost forgot this actually, even in the earliest days before that, my dad was actually an inventor. And so he tried to, he was actually very much ahead of his time, but his English was very limited. And so he invented things like the keyless entry for the garage door opener, right? I mean, a lot of us, get into the garage that way, but at the time it was very new. And so the very first job, before any of these mom and pop businesses, would he put us to work actually with a soldering iron to etch by hand the circuit boards.
How old were you then?
I was like 8, right? And so this is why I was like, I don't think I ever want to go into tech, right? It was like, okay, laid off, right? It's very unstable. And now I'm trying to figure out how to etch with these dangerous chemicals, and I barely know what I'm doing, but you put the tape and things. In retrospect, it was fascinating, but I was not the best employee.
Are you the best employee now? Did that ever change?
I'm now sort of a serial founder, and I love doing that. But the fact of the matter is, I actually have loved every job I've ever had. Like my first job was actually as a telemarketer. This was back in the day. Yeah. I know everyone hates us.
Rough.
Yeah, right. No, nobody likes us. It's like, today's fancy speak. I was an SDR, but really back then I was a telemarketer where, and back then it was literally opening a phone book and dialing and trying to get the best leads for, at the time, the vacuum cleaner salesman. What was your first job?
I worked at a hair salon.
What did you do?
I washed people's hair and I gave them head massages and I swept the floors.
That's great. I think doing customer service is a great job that everyone should do. I worked in restaurants, things like that too.
We used to do these events with my old job at the Kiwi Landing Pad, and we used to take all of these sort of operators and founders down to New Zealand and do this road show. All of them had a hospitality background, and you could tell because it came through and how they dealt with people, how they sort of thrived in.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, right? Because you're always observing what do people need, responding to them. I agree. I think it's a great background.
So what was it like for you growing up Asian American in America? I know that you've written things about this.
When you're going through it, it's not really conscious. And also race, gender, things like that were not really talked about as much as they are now. And so you just were. Right? And it was just the reality of things that you accepted, frankly. And so my parents were immigrants. They, didn't speak a lot of English. And so grew up in San Jose, which, the Bay Area actually has a fair amount of Asian population now, but at the time there weren't as many of them. And so until I went back and looked actually at my first grade picture, I didn't realize, I was like, oh, there was only me in the class who was Asian. And I do remember things like always feeling a little bit different, right? And always feeling like, okay, I don't really understand some of the social norms, and really hoping I could fit in. But I remember walking to school, and I hated walking by this one house that I had to walk by every day. The garage was open, and every time I'd walk by, they would yell chink. Right? And I would just pretend I didn't hear it and just keep walking. But at the time, it was more just uncomfortable, as opposed to there wasn't anger about the racism. It was just it's almost embarrassed about being different. It's I just wish I could fit in with everyone else, as opposed to really, because at the time, with my kids, I want them to learn Mandarin, right? I want them to learn the culture. But at the time, all of my parents and all of my generation wanted to do was just fit in so you're not discriminated against. Speak English whenever you can, because you don't want to speak English with an accent. And so that's really kind of all I wanted to do growing up was can I just be like everyone else? Can I just not stand out?
I guess when we talked on the phone earlier, you sort of talked about the insights that you've learned from being an outsider, and then the sort of gift that has turned into later in life.
So with a lot of immigrant families, and I wouldn't say everyone, I can only speak from my own experiences, but a lot of Asian immigrant families, you don't talk about a lot of things, right? Except for food, piano,
university,
school, right? Homework, right? Things like that. But you don't really, you don't talk about stuff. You don't talk about feelings. You don't talk about real world politics. You don't talk about life. Nobody ever asks you how you're feeling, right? It was just different when I was growing up. And so as a result, what I realized is, and also my parents didn't really speak English. And when, friends and family would come over, it was, largely in Mandarin. And so I didn't grow up actually really knowing how to make small talk with people, or really even feeling comfortable doing that. And so it took me a really, really long time to figure out how to do that. I really don't feel like I learned to talk to adults until I was in my mid-30s. I'm just a little bit of a slow learner and late bloomer. And so I spent a lot of my life saying, I just want to blend in. I just don't want to stand out, right? I wish I were like everyone else. And then also thinking like, God, I wish I could be like everyone else, because they move so easily through this world and this culture where I don't. And then so somewhere along the way, what I realized is actually being an outsider and being an observer and not being, the center of everything is an asset, because it turns out like in being in hospitality or otherwise, it's like you notice things that other people don't notice. Because one, I was desperately trying to fit in, right? So it's like, okay, what are other people doing? Or noticing how people are reacting and saying, okay, can I hide in the background and things like that. So I actually think growing up with the background I did allowed me to be more observant to what was going on around me and to realize that there's actually some benefits to being the outsider, because then you recognize, you have pattern recognition, and then you also know where are the opportunities if, that maybe someone else might not quite notice.
Are you also introverted?
Oh, yeah, for sure. What are you?
Introverted.
Yeah.
It's actually funny with small talk. I think I only learnt how to have small talk, one, from my now husband partner, because he's really great with social graces. And also I listened to a podcast about small talk, but that was like 2 years ago. I've never been great at small talk, also socially awkward. And I also just didn't care about the weather. And so I am more of a person that I'm like, I want to ask you about life and like your deepest dreams or whatever, rather than talk about the weather or just like sit there in silence, which a lot of people just find very, very awkward. So I totally feel you on that one.
No, and I agree. Like, I'm completely good with comfortable silences, which maybe some people think are uncomfortable. But you know what, somewhere along the way, which is, I agree with you, like small talk seems so meaningless, and I didn't want to do it, and I wasn't good at it. And so one of the reasons I think I was able to move beyond that or take my upbringing and turn it into sort of business success is that I had a lot of bosses who were phenomenal and gave me a lot of hard lessons. So like one of my bosses, when I was at a big Fortune 100 company, he said, you should be more political. And so what would your response be?
If I try put myself in your shoes from what you just said, I'm like shrinking.
Yeah. That was my first response, which is like, ew, like who wants to be political? Like, I don't want to be political. But what I've also learned over time is that feedback is a gift. And even though he said that, and my initial reaction was like, ew, like, I don't want to be political. Like, you can be political. I don't want to be political. Like, that's just not me. What he was really saying was, be more deliberate about your relationship building. Because what he observed that I was doing, and I was doing this because I'm always just like, okay, I'm just going to heads down and work really hard, and that's what I'm going to do. And then the people that I happened to work with knew me and knew my work and was like, oh, she's great. But I didn't like look around and say, okay, you know what? I really enjoyed working with so-and-so. And so let me look for a project to go work with them or see if they want to have coffee or follow up or do it. It was like, okay, task oriented. I did this. And so I do know a lot of people because now I've had a long working career, but had I been more deliberate about relationship building, I might have twice as many relationships as I do now. And then the second piece of it is that about relationship building, which is how I took that feedback. You know, having a superficial chit chat is not a relationship building. And so what I found over time was also because I don't really like to talk about myself, is that I'd love to hear, I mean, this is probably why you have this show, right? You'd love to hear about all the interesting things about the other person. And there's something interesting about everyone. And so that's what I became to like actually love meeting new people. And I just think people are pretty darn interesting. So, but it took me a while. But part of it, I think, was deflecting, which is like, I don't really want to have to talk about myself. So let me figure out how I can hear everything there is to know about you.
I only like talking about myself when we're talking about the things that I'm interested in, because it's not really about me. So like gardening, I can tell you about how to grow the perfect pumpkin and loads of vegetables, but only if people are interested in that will they get that out of me, because it's like deadly boring to a lot of people.
So what do you not like to talk about? Like if I asked you right now, you'd start squirming.
Anything that I can be on the record with. So like politics, religion, I'm like terrified of saying the wrong thing. So
especially today.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard to have an open dialogue.
So I do like talking about hard topics in safe spaces. You might unintentionally say the wrong thing, and that sort of terrifies me. One, I don't want to offend someone. Two, like I feel like you have to be very, very well like read, or, you know, and a lot of people are very quick to say, that's wrong or that's not right, rather than, well, actually, here's my experience. And so then I get to learn something.
When I started to write things about like my dad or Asian hate, when that happened, I didn't think anyone would even read this stuff, right? It was just more I just needed to write it and say it. And both of those pieces, as well as another piece, ended up, I don't write very often, but oftentimes when I do,
it goes viral.
It goes viral, even though I'm like, why would anyone read this? Like, it's a tribute to my father. Like, I don't know that anyone cares, but I felt like I had to do it because for me, because of closure, because I was angry a lot at my upbringing and my family and having to do all these jobs that I was like, and then I feel guilt because I was a terrible daughter. And so I just had to write it. And then as a part of writing this, I actually ended up connecting all these dots between sort of my upbringing and the challenges, my dad's upbringing, and how it influenced a lot of my life, which was kind of crazy. But I didn't think anyone would read it. And it was like one of the pieces that went the most viral. You know, lots of times when I write things, especially the deeply personal, I'm like, I'm just going to do it because no one's going to really read it anyway. And then when they read it, I was like, oh, that feels good. To like, one, do a tribute to my father, who was a great man, but I didn't quite realize it for many years. And then second, so many people said, I see myself in this. Yeah. Right? So many people, like, that was so touching to me. And some people who said, like, I grew up like this, I never talked about it. Right? But this is exactly what happened with me, like in the Asian hate. A lot of people who've known me a long time have said, I never knew this happened. And I was like, that's because I didn't talk about it. And that's because all of your Asian friends also didn't talk about it because we don't talk about things like that. So it's sort of like my motivation is not like, oh, I'm going to have everyone know. It's just like, I just have to get it off my chest. And it's like, I just want to write it. It is rewarding when people say, I learned something from this, or it's incredibly meaningful, which is like, I sent this to my college age son and he read it and he cried and he said, I wish I could have known Andy Yen. He sounds like an amazing person.
Funnily enough, I wrote about a mental health piece about my dad because he died by suicide. Oh, wow. And I wrote a piece about mental health, I think 10 years later. And I was it was around the time when like I saw a lot of founders around me really struggling. And I was like, I know quite a bit about male mental health. Yeah. And I sort of was like, well, maybe by sharing my story about my dad, it would encourage or open up a dialogue around men's mental health, and hopefully that people might maybe get some help that they need. And so I think people go, oh, I'm not alone.
Yes, that's huge,
and
right?
Then
it's huge.
Two, they go, oh, well, maybe I can share my story. And then I think when you share and get it off your chest, it kind of is like...
It's very healing, like right? And it's very empowering in many ways. In fact, that's one of the reasons, so the other topic that ends up in my demographic that we talk about is like perimenopause and menopause, right? Because I have a lot of friends who are over the age of 40, but perimenopause can start in your mid-30s and even
I'm
early
aware.
30s.
I read your post.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the other post, right? Everyone's like, what do you post about? So I post about, I post about Asian hate. I posted about my father who was an immigrant, and I posted about perimenopause and menopause, basically the things that have affected me. But that's the other thing, is no one ever talked about it. And then so when you start to talk about it, you realize everyone's going through it. And it's like, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not the only one who can't get the word out or can't remember your name right now. There's 36 different symptoms. And so it's empowering. There's some comfort in knowing that you're not the only one going through it. And that also there's a path, right, toward either treating it or things that you can do to make sure you're in great health when you're 80.
Should we lean into that topic a little bit? I actually have a lot of friends who are over 40. My observation is, again, about mental health, just like the body image, the identity, the belly fat, their, you can talk about it.
The joint pain, the fatigue, the brain fog, all of that. And the stuff that you can't feel, like heart issues, cholesterol, goes on.
Do you want to tell me about your first hot flush and like what you thought was going on there?
So my symptoms, I didn't have hot flashes, right? I had fatigue. And so everyone's like, well, of course you're tired. You have a full-time job. You're a single parent with 2 kids. One of them's a competitive elite athlete. You're flying all over the place. You have a startup. You have all this. And it's like, of course you're tired. But a lot of us were like, I don't think I'm supposed to be this tired. So I had brain fog where you couldn't kind of remember the last word. And then I didn't realize it at the time because of course I didn't want to admit it, but I was cranky. Right. I was like irritable and cranky, and I was starting to get a little bit of anxiety for the first time in my life because I'm usually a pretty even-keeled.
Very calm.
Well, and some might say like I'm not emotive enough, right? I'm not a hypersensitive person, and I wasn't on anything to deal with menopause or perimenopause at the time. And so perimenopause, I think you probably know, right, could be 10 years before you hit menopause. And so where your hormones and your estrogen levels are just like going up and down and up and down. And, estrogen is not just a sex hormone to help you when you need to have babies. It is actually like a brain health and a whole body hormone, right? So that's why when it's going up and down, in my very non-scientific way of describing it for you all, it does all kinds of crazy things to your brain and otherwise your joints, inflammation, things like that. My current company is a venture fund, which is we raise money from investors, and they invest in Operator Collective, which is my company, and then we invest in startups. And so the investors are obviously very important. And oftentimes these investors so Operator Collective has a lot of operators, which we'll talk about in a second, but also has big like endowments, universities, and foundations. And so I was meeting the new chief investment officer of a large institution, and I met him for lunch. And before we got there, I was like, oh my God, I'm like not feeling very well. And so I'm like I was like, okay, I think I haven't eaten. I'm like, okay, grab some bread.
Sugar.
Yeah, and I was like, let me get some bread and butter. I was like, okay, and I was like chugging a bunch of water. So then he comes, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay. And so then he comes and we're talking, and then finally I'm like, oh my God, like I don't know what's going on. I'm like trying to talk to him, and then I was like, I just need a moment. And so I was like, and he's like, oh my God, okay. Right? He's probably like, don't pass out. And so I go and I sit in the lobby of the restaurant, and I start Googling, and I was like, heart attack. And I was like, okay, thank God it's not a heart attack. And I was like, is it stroke? And I like Google, and I was like, okay, it's not a stroke. Have you ever had a hot flash? No. Yeah. So all of you who haven't had a hot flash yet, and it manifests a little bit differently with everyone. But it's not just you just get hot and start sweating, which is what I thought it was. It's like this weird flush too, right? So you're feeling like this weird thing and you just feel off. And so then I was like, oh my God, it's a hot flash. So then I got excited because I figured out what it was. So anyway, that's the long story of my whole hot flash, so that if any of you are going through that or you see someone going through it, you realize that it's okay. Like it will pass.
And the reason why, one, you shared, and this thing that you wrote, and also 2, you invested in the company, and then 3 was the medical profession hasn't been trained. I think you said they get an hour of training on menopause.
Maybe in medical school, maybe in 1 hour of training on perimenopause.
50% of the world.
Yeah, and 100% of women will go through menopause.
Yeah.
And that's how much training they get. There's only about 730 board certified OBGYNs who are even trained in menopause in the entire United States, right? And most counties don't even have an OBGYN at all. And most OBGYNs are focused on the thing that's the most profitable, which is having babies, right? And so, which by the way, is good.
So last thing on this, and thank you for sharing. I mean, the bountiful audience, there are a lot of people 35 to 60. And so age range wise, I think people listening to this actually will be like, oh my gosh, thank God that it's been talked about and you're investing in this space. And I'm actually pleased that the dialogue is very open now, because I think I worry about workplaces where people aren't feeling very well all the time, but there's no discourse around why. And it's like you're trying to do your best, do your job, be healthy, probably be a good partner, maybe a parent, and then you're like feeling terrible.
Well, and also this generation, when you're between 35 and 65, it is a sandwich generation. You've got kids on the bottom end, right on coming up, and you've got probably aging parents, which is in some ways even harder than kids, because they often degrade, right? And the world is not quite set up as well for that. So I think I'm encouraged that there is the open dialogue, because it really is when women are starting to enter the most productive years of their lives, and it's very manageable and treatable.
So you started your career as a lawyer, and then you're also a founder, you have had a not-for-profit, and then now you're a VC or venture capitalist. Can you sort of just tell me about your career and then, what you're working on now?
So I started out my career as a lawyer. Even when I was a lawyer, though, I had the benefit of having some really great bosses. And so the biggest insult my boss could ever give you, which would be like, Sean, you sound like a lawyer. So even from an early day, right, I was trained to be a business person. So I had the benefit of having some really great people who was like, don't stay between the law lines. You need to think even more broadly than that. And so when I was at Cisco, there was this patent troll problem where these people would take patents, buy them on the open market, and then just sue a lot of big companies. And so that actually turned into, I hate inefficiency, right? I like, and once I learned something, I'm like, oh, instead of having everyone else have to relearn this and rediscover this, let's just share it with everyone else because there's a better way of doing it as opposed to trying to figure it out on your own. And so that's what we did with my first startup, which is I was like, if we can all band together, then we can defend ourselves better against this. And so one thing led to another, and that became a venture-backed startup that we took from 0 to 100 million in revenue and public in 3 years.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, and so that was my foray into it, which was not ever driven by the fact that like I want to start a company. It's like this is a problem. There's a better way. Like there's a solution here, as opposed to just fighting this one case at a time in the court, and this is never going to end, and it's costing our company so much money. Let's all work together. And so that was probably my second community. My first community had to do with a nonprofit. I was promoted to the head of intellectual property at Cisco. And so at the time, again, this was in 2005. And when I got promoted into this position, a reporter wanted to, it was legal tech, right, paper. They interviewed me and said, we were just kind of talking about things, and I don't think she even knew what the story was going to be. And she said, how many other women are there who are chief IP counsel at like major corporations? And I said, well, there's so-and-so, 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 and so-and-so. So I came up with 6 other women. And the reason for that, and I was like, there's only 6 of us. And the reason for it is because mostly you have to have a technical degree, and then you have to work your way up. And these positions are so coveted that once you work your way up, you really don't move, right? You want to stay there kind of forever unless you become the general counsel. So there's one person, right, at each one of these companies. And then 2, they're such great jobs. And then 3, the funnel's a little bit smaller too, because you typically have to have a technical degree. So as a result of this article, we came together and I was like, we kind of know each other, but like there's so few of us, we should know each other more. One thing led to another because, I have this compulsion to build communities and things, and the ability to, the desire to not have people recreate the wheel. One thing led to another, and now it became a full-blown nonprofit that's 5,000 plus members and like 27 chapters around the world.
All IP lawyers, or has it broadened out?
So it started out as women in patent law, because as you also know about building communities, you need to start very niche and very specific, because that's what brings you together. And then slowly you can expand from there.
Can you talk, so a lot of your life has been shaped a little bit by being like the outsider or not the obvious choice. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned from sort of not being the obvious choice for this role, like no technical degree?
Yeah, no, that's very, you picked up on that. So most people who become chief IP counsel have a computer science or engineering degree, and I majored in finance. So what happened is I had worked with the then chief IP counsel at Cisco, who was the first chief IP counsel, and we got to know each other. We got to know each other's work. And so when he finally got to hire someone, he was like, you should join me, because one of these days I'm gonna step aside and like we'll work together, and then you can step into this role. And so I was like, great, I love working with this guy. And I did have a moment of panic. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm gonna be chief patent counsel, chief IP counsel, and like, I don't have a technical degree. So I had a little moment of panic where I thought, I don't think I'm the right person for this. If you have a job description, women won't apply unless they check all the boxes, whereas other genders may not check all the boxes and they'll still apply with utter confidence, right? So at the time, if he had posted it, I probably wouldn't have applied, because I'm sure it would have said technical degree, blah, 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 blah. But he knew me and said, I think you're gonna be great for this job. And so when I finally joined, I was like, why did you hire me for this job? He's like, I knew your work. I'm like, I don't have a technical degree. And he goes, what I like and why you're successful and why I wanted you for this position is because you think outside the box. And inside, it took me a while to realize, I was literally said to myself, Robert, that's because I actually don't know enough to know what the box is. And so but I came to realize that that's actually an asset, because if you're like, oh, this is how it's always done, this is how I was taught, then you only end up coloring between the lines because it's so ingrained in you. But when you don't know, it can be really liberating because you actually don't even know what the confines are supposed to be. That being said, it's good to have some awareness, right? So you're not completely recreating everything, but I think it can be very liberating to be someone who comes, and when we invest in founders too, is I like people who have some background, but if they have almost too much background, it can be a detriment because they're like, no, that can't be done. There's that balance between knowing enough to be dangerous, but not being so rigid in your thinking that you're not going to innovate.
You can also learn the box later, right?
Yes, exactly.
I think we should move into Operator Collective because I think it's another great example of, you're like, the box doesn't fit, so we're just going to make a new one.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Tell me about Operator Collective, maybe what the traditional VC model is and how you decided to just flip it on its head.
The venture world is sort of been intentionally sort of murky, right? It's like, who are your LPs? What is even an LP? And so the traditional venture fund is, there's a venture firm where you have general partners who are the ones who make the investing decisions. They have investors in the fund that are called limited partners or LPs. And those are traditionally institutional investors, foundations, endowments, pensions, et cetera. So when I came into venture, I was like, sort of stumbled into it, I guess. So then back up, my company that we took from 0 to 100 million in public in 3 years, we actually ended up taking it private again, right? Because it was a strange public company. You have to have comps, and we didn't really have a great comparable, so the analysts didn't know what to do with us. And then also kind of on the side, helped start, which is where you and I met, helped be a part of putting together SaaStr from the early days. So kind of did all this kind of on the side, but despite all of this, I still felt like an outsider to venture. It's like I mostly identified as an enterprise operator, like a big company operator, even though I'd been a founder, even though I'd been part of SaaStr from the early days, even though I'd worked with a lot of startups at this point. I still felt like I don't really understand the venture world as much. But after we sold that company to private equity, took it private again, all these founders and VCs were like, oh, can you talk to this company and this company because you've grown revenue in the enterprise from the ground up to 300 million, which turns out is not that common. So I was like, great, because it's fun, right? We love meeting with startups. We love working with founders. Like, people are so curious. There's so much energy around it. And so when I started to meet with the founders and VCs, they were like, oh my gosh, how did you do this and this and this? I'm like, well, this is what we did. And what I realized is I was like, wow, they think what I'm saying is really helpful and really pretty brilliant. But actually, I know a lot of people like me who have done this, but people like me don't really end up in the same circles as the VCs and the founders, because a lot of us, you know a lot of people like you. So I knew a lot of people who were women over the age of 40 who were juggling big careers, just trying to survive. And most of us had kids at home or aging parents or both. And so as a result of that, my aha moment was like, they think I'm a novelty, and they're smart enough to know that they want access to people like me because we can help make their businesses more successful. But people like me aren't really, we're not in the same circles because we're just in a different network group. And so that was the aha moment, which is, what if I put together a venture fund where I really just tore apart the venture model, rebuilt it from the ground up, and optimized for these amazing operators who have built and scaled up companies like Salesforce and Stripe and Slack. And I also knew a lot of people like me who had the desire and the skills, but how do you figure out how to access and do it on top of everything else you're trying to do? Because remember, I hate inefficiency.
What I love about it, and when I sort of saw it, I mean, my brain was like, these are the people that you, if you're an operator yourself or a founder, you're like, these are the people I want to talk to. Mm-hmm. But you can't get access to them because they're so busy doing their own thing. And then also so many different opinions of people who have seen the same thing over and over again.
Yes,
they're giving you almost like the shortcuts or the information that you need to go faster, which is kind of the world that startups live in, right?
And the idea behind it, exactly, you pick up on so many aspects of this because you've been living in this world, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have over 100 operator LPs. It's not like you have one COO and that's all their experience is, or one CTO, but we have 20. And because the problem that you may be facing or the person you need to talk to, it may not be that one person, or I may not have the background to help you, but this person and this person and this person are the ones that you should talk to and can help you. And also, because we're all busy, most of us are parents, most of us have have huge day jobs. It's like, you can't be the one person for everything. And so it was liberating for the operators who signed up to be like, oh, I can do this because I'm not going to disappoint anyone. Because I think that's part of our gender too, which is like, you don't want to sign up for things that you don't think that you can fulfill.
I have your stats: 90% women, 40% people of colour, and 77% first-time investors. Yeah. I have 2 quick questions on this, and then we can sort of move on. How much funds have you deployed?
150 million under management. And so we had a first fund, which was 50 million. When I was starting the fund, this was another part where I knew enough about venture, but I had never done it. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't know, which some were very helpful because I did things like, okay, I'm gonna have 100 LPs. Whereas if I came from venture, I might have thought like, that's not manageable. How are you gonna possibly do that? But the other thing is what I also had is I had been a community builder, I had been a company builder, and I had been an operator. So like 100 people, like you and I can handle 100 people. We know how to do that. And so, but there were a lot of things that
And you don't like inefficiency, so you would have just systematized the process.
We systematized. My third hire, I mean, it was a small fund, right? 50 million is still a relatively small fund, but my third hire was a data scientist, which was because I was like, we're gonna have this down to a science. We have to build proprietary systems because you and I have sat there with the spreadsheets.
No, I don't.
I know, right? It's like, it's triggering in some ways because at like 2 a.m., you're trying to match all the spreadsheets. I'm like, it can't happen. Like, this is not like, who can I remember to make an intro to in my head? We have to have this down to a science. So there was a lot of things that people said, oh, you're never going to raise a fund that's bigger than, you should raise a fund that's 5 to 10 million, do the proof of concept and do whatever. But what happened was I went to the operators. I would start talking about like, this is the vision of what I want to do. And within 30 seconds, they'd be like, stop.
I'm in.
Or they're like, you had me at hello. So it was very fortunate that a lot of people believed, right? And then also said, how can I help you? Like, let me make intros, let me help you, let me introduce you to the 5 or 10 people who I think would be phenomenal. So everything has been word of mouth. So, Operator Collective exists, and we exist really to serve this community of really amazing people because we wouldn't exist without them.
I mean, you did it. You created Operator Collective. It's running. You've deployed a lot of funds. I do think that maybe my experience of community building, if you do a good job, is that people watch you operate for a really long time. So the moment that you ask for something, they're like, well, I've watched you do your thing for years. And so it's almost like without a doubt, if you know what I mean. And so people watching you operate for years and years and years throughout your different things, I'm sort of not really surprised that they were like, of course you can do this.
Yeah, but you know what? A lot of people who came into Operator Collective at the beginning, I didn't know. So I started with people that I knew.
Yeah. So it was just that collective, like,
I get it. And also because the people who made the intro put their credibility on the line.
Moving into the more philosophical part of our episode, how do you know when to ignore the naysayers? I know that you sort of said that you love feedback. And so how is it helpful? And you told me that sometimes you need to ignore them and sometimes you actually really want that feedback.
I always want to hear the feedback, whether it feels good or not to have it, right? I think that there's value in feedback because the fact that someone's taking the time to actually give you feedback, they're giving something, and it might not be easy feedback. And so there's a lot of things, for instance, when I started the fund, which they gave a lot of feedback, which is, okay, you've never done this or you haven't had this. And so instead of pushing back, because I think some conventional wisdom is like, oh, Sean, just ignore the naysayers. Like, don't worry about, they say, you go, girl, you just go chart your own path, which there's an aspect of that. But what you said earlier too, which is it's helpful to learn what the box is, because if someone else has that reaction, if someone has that reaction to you and is giving you the gift of telling you, other people are having that reaction too, and they may or may not be telling you. It's like, hear what they're saying. It doesn't mean you have to say, okay, now I can't do it. It's like, how can you turn what is a potential weakness into how can I fortify that weakness so that I can like head it off at the pass, right? Before someone can even raise this or go down that path to say, oh, I've added X, Y, and Z, and this is why this works. And so I think that being able to take that feedback and say, okay, what are they trying to say? Even with the whole, you should be more political type of thing, which is different than outside the box, but it's like, what are they really trying to say here? There's always something to be had by that.
So we're here on the Bountiful podcast. Obviously, have to ask you this question. What does it mean to you to live a bountiful life?
A bountiful life is, I think to have family. I think that people fundamentally like to feel like they're giving, right? It's not, it is incredibly rewarding to give. I think to have the privilege of being able to give back, to the privilege to be able to pay it forward, it's incredibly rewarding.
And then what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
So to my 25-year-old self, what would I say? I would say at 25, you're still learning. I think it is a good time to obsessively over-prepare, which is you just want to learn everything that you can, because you can't just be strategy, right, when you're 25. And so obsessively over-prepare, but also don't overthink things. Just jump in. You're never going to have perfect information. You're not going to be perfectly prepared. And so just jump in when it feels right. And don't do things for the title, which I had the fortunate that I didn't, which was, who are the people that I want to work with? Who do I think I want to learn from? And so I guess I would tell my 25-year-old self, okay, good decision. You work with some great people that you learned a lot from.
What is your most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Okra. Love okra. Do you like okra?
No.
See, most people don't like it. It's so good.
But I like shishito peppers, and they're basically cousins.
They are cousins.
Favorite cocktail?
Mocktails.
Worst childhood meal?
Probably sea cucumber. Have you had it?
Yeah.
Do you like it?
No.
No, yeah. Oh, yeah, you don't like the textures, right? Yeah, weird texture.
Word for your life?
Maybe it's connection.
That's what it says. One thing that's mattered more than you realized?
I was not an athlete growing up. I didn't really start exercising and things until I was 20, but I just then started. And so what I realize now is that all those habits that I formed earlier are really serving me well now, because you just need to be building up these habits over time so that you can be healthy, when you're in perimenopause.
So like working out, eating healthy.
Working out, eating healthy, just, weight-bearing exercises, like all the, I could name them all.
I actually said this to my mum the other day, because I went on this massive kick about building muscle mass and
Yes, you have to do it now, because bone density and muscle mass and protein, and was she receptive?
Totally. She's been going in the gym.
That's good.
And I was like, here's the thing. And also what I loved about it actually was reframing the conversation, which I know that you're really big on, is rather than telling someone to go for a run or to get exercise to be healthy, changing it to, well, actually, you need to build your muscle mass and your bone density, because if you want to have mobility when you're older, these are the things that matter.
Do you have a weighted vest yet?
Do I have a weighted what?
A weighted vest?
No, but I have heard about this.
So weighted vest,
Yeah.
box jumps,
Okay.
protein.
Yeah.
And then the thing that I don't do that well at, sleep. Yeah.
I'm
working on that.
I guessed that one.
I'm working on that.
One thing that mattered less than you thought it did.
Worrying about what other people think.
What is a simple habit that you do that makes your life better?
So part of those habits is I do push-ups every night before bed. So I started with 10, and now I do 25. And one would say, why don't you just keep going? I don't know. I've just stopped at 25.
Are these woman push-ups or like full?
No knee push-ups, which is okay. If you start with knee push-ups, it's okay too. But no, they're push-ups.
What brings you joy?
It is making connections between people, when you can introduce two people and you just see the magic happen.
Last question, and I'm going a bit rogue, but if you reflect on your life, your career, everything you've done, and I guess the person that you are, what do you want to impart on the Bountiful audience about anything, really?
The world is not easy right now, right? There's so much going on, and there's so much that is outside of our control. And I think that one thing that I don't do enough of is take a moment to really be in the moment, right? There's a lot, quiet the noise. And so I think it's like, take a moment to be present. I think that can be hard to do in this noisy world. And it's certainly something that I need to work on.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your journey, and for actually talking to me as someone who doesn't like to talk about themselves. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Bountiful podcast, and I really hope that our listeners just be inspired by your journey, and that you don't have to be the obvious choice, the right choice, but you can basically do whatever you want if you put your mind to it. So thank you so much.